We are really excited here today to have the second in the webinar series, Serving on Groups That Make Decisions, and this is part of the START Parent Leadership Development Training Project. And this project is funded by the New Jersey Department of Children and Families Division of Family and Community Partnerships under their Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge grant. So we are very appreciative of our partnership with them and the funding we have to really build strong parent leadership throughout the state of New Jersey, and in particular to build strong parent leadership to be active participants in the new statewide network of county councils for young children which exist in every county in New Jersey. Let's see. The other thing I'd like to say is that this is housed under the START project at SPAN. So many of you know that SPAN is the statewide parent advocacy network, and the START project is one of multiple projects at SPAN, and we focus on making sure that the parents are really active and engaged partners in the education process to improve outcomes for all children. Next slide. So it takes a number of hands and people to really pull off a webinar. And today I am Diane Malley, and I'm the project director. We also with us today is Michelle Tyler, who you will hear from. Monique Duche-Wilson is going to be presenting. Casey Dudley is here with us today helping, as well as Tatiana DeGrossa and Debbie Esposito. Some of these folks are behind the scene and others will be presenting. Next slide. So again, this is part of a series, and today's focus is on processes and tools groups use. And it's a 5-part series. I would like to note that on September 29th, it is an overview of this curriculum which will be presented in Spanish. Next slide. So this curriculum was developed in the state of Wisconsin, and we are very appreciative and thankful to all the folks there for their generosity in sharing their materials. You can also go to their website, servingongroups.org, to directly get sections, download each section of the guidebook and additional materials. So this is a collaborative, the guidebook was produced as a collaborative effort between state agencies, school representatives, and family members. And it is it was developed in, as I said, Wisconsin as part of the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction State Personnel Development Grant in partnership with the Wisconsin Family Assistance Center for Education, Training, and Support and the Wisconsin Statewide Parent Educator Initiative. Next slide. So it was developed due to an identified need to really provide more training and support to parents to be really active and effective members on decision-making groups. And again, it was produced and had input from a broad, diverse section of stakeholders in the community, including family input. The guidebook and this curriculum is intended specifically for family members, but is also very useful for anyone who may be serving on a decision-making group. Next slide. So today we hope that we're going to help you learn about the principles that guide group practices and the processes that many groups use. We'll introduce a number of tools that groups use, and all of this is to help you become confident and active participants in decision-making groups. So with that, I'd like to now turn it over to Michelle, who's going to find out who is on the call with us today. Go ahead, Michelle.
Thanks so much, Diane. I'd like to echo what you said, that I'm so glad that everyone is here joining us today for the webinar. One thing with webinars is that it's great and convenient, but we don't get to see who's out there with us. So I'd like to launch our first poll that states, I am attending this webinar as a parent or caregiver, member or staff for County Council for Young Children, educator, or other. So if you guys can take maybe another 10, 15 seconds or so. At this time, 40% of you have voted, to just vote and let me know how you're attending this webinar today. Okay, another 2 seconds. We're at 80% voted, so thanks so much for participating. And I'm going to close the poll question out and share. And I see that 18% of you are parents or caregivers, and 35% are members or staff of the council, and 12% educators, and 35% other. So thanks so much for letting us know who exactly is in the room. Okay, so I'm going to turn this over now to Monique to begin the content of the webinar.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and good afternoon, everyone. In this section, you will learn about the processes that groups use. The most effective groups, regardless of the type of group, use a variety of processes to guide their work. Some of these processes that we're going to be talking about may be new to you, but as we take you through this section, you will learn about the principles that guide group practices and the important but common processes groups use. Next slide. So let's take a look at the guiding principles of shared decision-making. Before we do that, however, let's define exactly what guiding principles are. And they are values. They're a basic truth, law, or assumption that is accepted to be true. It establishes a standard. It can be a test for measuring, regulating, or guidance. So as we go through these principles, as members of decision-making groups, it's important that you are aware of the following principles, and you need to see if they are happening in your group. So these principles are shared vision, which means groups need to find common ground. What is your shared dream? Otherwise, each member is working towards different goals. Representation, which means there must be consideration for the needs and perspectives of all people who are affected. Otherwise, the group is making decisions for others without hearing their concerns, their questions, and opinions. Therefore, you might be creating a group that's misrepresented and perhaps has an agenda that's not even of the people the group is supposed to be serving. Equal partners, which means each member must be treated equally. Otherwise, some members won't feel like true participants. No one wants to feel like a token. Collaboration, which means there are opportunities to work together. Otherwise, everyone is working alone in their own bubble or silo. Shared responsibility, and that means everyone agrees to do their part. Everyone is committed. For example, the group is committed to improving outcomes for children. If there's one person or a small group of people doing it all, there is not the feeling of ownership of the entire group or by the other members. And when that one person or small group leaves, the other parts of the groups have no agenda. They don't know in what way to go. Information sharing. That means staying up to date, being relevant and current on information regarding an issue. Otherwise, a gap will arise within the group, and not all of the members will be able to make well-informed decisions. And again, will feel like they are not true participants of this group. Producing results. In shared decision-making groups, groups need to check their progress and adjust as needed. Otherwise, nothing is accomplished. So what is the point of the group? Now, if one of these principles is missing, these outcomes are impacted and shared decision-making is compromised. Guiding principles, again, are a belief that guides how you do the work. It's the manner in which you implement your group's processes and create success. Next slide. So here's an everyday example of guiding principles that relate to a decision-making body. And they can easily be applied to an individual group or to a decision-making task. This particular example is showing an individual family service plan or an individual education team meeting. And it is an everyday example of shared decision making. So let's take a look at each guiding principle through this lens. You can see that there's shared vision, and that should be that everyone on this team. And please think about this again in regards to any group that you might be a part of or serve on. You shared vision. All want the child to be healthy, happy, and successful. You have to have that same vision, that same dream. Representation. Anyone working with this child or being represented on this group has the best interest of the child, and the best interest is present. Equal partners. All ideas, concerns, and questions are heard, and there is value to them. Everyone works together to come up with a plan. That's true collaboration. Everyone does their part to support the child's learning at school, home, and in the community. Everyone shares the responsibility. Information sharing. The same information is given to all, so all are able to make a well-informed decision, and you will produce results, which will be the child making progress. Next slide, please. So I have a question to all of you, and at this time you can type in your chat box. Have you been involved in shared decision making in a group or in some type of shared decision making task? And let us know what made it successful and what might have been challenging. So we're going to provide about a minute or two for you to, if you so please, to type that answer into the chat box, and then we'll read them out loud.
Hi, it's Karen. We have a strategy here for what made it successful. Ground rules are important and should be enforced by everyone. We also have, Kevin says, challenging people with different agendas. And Rebecca added shared vision, collaboration, and representation. Miriam added that having an agenda ahead of time is successful. A challenge has been having no mentoring for new members, and I could see where that can make a lot of problems with keeping your group sustainable. So successful by Kevin is people on the same page. And Tara says, oh, sorry, she was answering a different question. Let's see. I think that's all we have for now. Anyone else? Okay, and I think we're back to Monique.
Yes, thank you, Karen. Thank you so much. So again, as a member of decision-making groups, it's important to be aware of the following principles and to ensure that they are happening in your group. You always have the opportunity to look back and to review those guiding principles and to implement them in the groups that you're a part of. So how do groups make decisions, and hopefully great decisions? It's by starting with the end in mind. In other words, focusing on the outcomes and then working toward positive results. Here are some helpful reminders. Celebrate and publicize your successes. When people work together on a common goal or a common vision, it's great to come together and to show your outcomes and the successes that have happened. If your results are not positive or what you have hoped to accomplish, the group can go back to the process and make adjustments until they have a plan that is producing positive results.
So excuse me, Monique, I think we're just troubleshooting getting the screen back up for everybody, but due to time we'll keep rolling. So Monique, let's keep rolling, and we're a little past where we should be. So move right swiftly into the next section, please.
Okay, thank you, Diane. So we're going to talk about the processes that groups use. And there are 6 common processes. that groups commonly use: information gathering, goal setting, planning, collaboration, evaluation, and processes for reaching agreement. We're going to look at these processes a little bit in detail, and I am going to pass this on to Tatiana to start this section off.
Thank you, Monique. Good afternoon. So one of the very first processes groups use is information gathering. It comes from three main sources: data collection, through brainstorming, and focus group participation. It is important for groups to gather and use accurate information, sometimes called data. It comes in many forms like numbers and facts, perspectives, and personal stories. Data can be gathered in many ways, from an existing source or gathered through surveys, interviews. The brainstorming next is brainstorming. Brainstorming is a strategy used when groups want to generate and collect lots of ideas. The goal here is to come up with as many ideas as possible without first evaluating them. Focus groups are groups of participants who are asked a few questions and then they give their perspectives or stories. An example of a focus group is gathering school families and community members together to discuss safety and security of our group. Many different issues may be identified during the information gathering process that will need to be addressed later on. However, priority may be given to issues that are the most important or that may take the most time to accomplish. The bottom line is that it is critical to have accurate and up-to-date information before the group makes a decision. To learn more about how to use data on decision-making group, register for our next webinar scheduled for September 8th. If you follow along our PowerPoint presentation that is available in the handout section, we're going to move on to the second process that groups use is goal setting. So next slide, please. Goal setting. So a goal is what a group wants to see happen, and it needs to be stated up front so the group knows what they're working towards. Goals could be both short-term and long-term, and they're set after group determines their priorities, as just discussed. Reviewing the group's vision and mission statements also can help the goal-setting process. Oftentimes, we see ineffective groups being ineffective because they lack clear goals or have failed to communicate those goals to all of their members. To help us set direction, let's look at the vision and mission statements. A vision statement describes the changes the group wants to see happen in the future as a result of their actions. Statewide Parent Advocacy Network, for example, has the following vision. Our vision is that all families will have the resources and support they need to ensure that their children become fully participating and contributing members of our communities and society. Our mission statement is different from a vision statement, and it provides a direction and sets goals and actions and decision-making processes of the group. So here at SPAN, our mission is to empower and support families and inform and involve professionals interested in the healthy development and education of children and youth. If your group does not have a vision and mission statement at this time, we encourage you to learn a little more about both of these wonderful tools and consult our resources that are provided at the end of the PowerPoint and on our website. SMART goals are goals that are written to help the group accomplish what the group is set out to do. And they're described as SMART. S standing for specific. What are you going to do? M is for measurable and answers the question, how are you going to do it? A is for attainable. Can you commit to doing it? R for realistic, is it doable? And T for timely. What is your time frame for accomplishing the goal? And I believe in our handouts section for today's webinar, we have a wonderful tool that you can use in your group to develop a SMART goal. Next. Back to Monique.
Thank you, Tatiana. The third process is planning, and a plan begins to form when the team agrees on the first steps and how much to work on at that time. It's sometimes called an action plan, and this plan should include who will do what, by when, and in what order. So there's two helpful tools that we're going to discuss today, and they are helping to plan our logic models. Logic models are diagrams that illustrate how a group's activities connect to the group's goals and their outcomes. There's many ways to depict this model. Some may be simple or complex, and it really depends on your program focus, the purpose, and the audience. Next slide. So we're going to take a look at two different logic model examples. Next slide, please. The simplest form of a logic model includes three components. Inputs, and there are various resources that are available to support a program. Activities are the action component of the program. How do you develop or select it? How do you write the plan? How do you pull together a group or a coalition? And the outcomes, and that's the intended accomplishment of the group. That includes your short-term, intermediate, and long-term outcomes. So what you're seeing here is a simple example of an everyday logic model. It is for a family camping vacation. The orange items are the inputs. For the family vacation, we're going to need family members, a budget, a car, camping equipment. The green items are the outputs, or what needs to be done. You need to drive to the state park or to the camping resort. You have to set up camp. You have to cook. You're going to recreate and laugh and hike, perhaps go swimming. The hot pink item is the outcome of the family vacation, and that is that the family members learned a little bit more about each other. They had a great time, and they had an opportunity to bond. Now, during the shared decision model, everyone had input on planning that trip. If there is no exclusions and everybody had input, you have a successful vacation. Next slide. Here is another example of a logic model that's just a little bit more complex. And you can see we have the same categories as the last one. We have inputs, we have outputs, and we have our outcomes. But now we've added priorities and evaluation. And we've put those in because we've now created a visual of a clear understanding of what the specific problem or the situation is that's being addressed. And that's usually established through your vision and mission statement. And it usually includes reviewing existing data, doing research, and conducting assessments and identifying the needs as you're getting started. Evaluation may be necessary for the group to collect more information, to compare with that existing information, and how data is collected and shared with your team, your group, and others as your work progresses should be built into your action plan and tweaked when necessary. So you should just think of a logic model as a map that you develop to clarify and communicate what your group intends to do and its presumed impact. Next slide. Fourth process is collaboration, and that's when members of a group voluntarily bring their knowledge and experiences together to work towards a common goal. There's several ways to help to encourage collaboration, and we provide several of those tools on this slide. Next slide. When you're thinking of collaboration, an African proverb comes to mind, and it goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Now think, what is an experience that you've had that illustrates the message of this proverb? We need to remember that we can always do things ourselves and get them done quickly. Or we can work together with others, individuals, other teams of people, other groups, and we can make things happen right for the long term. The real assets of any organization are the people and what they bring to the table. It's their intellect, it's their personality, their skills, their integrity, and all of these other collective human life values that really create a true value and help provide those guiding principles that we use as we do our work. When we create experiences that make team members feel valued, they will care deeply about the work that's being done, and they will be a very big part of helping to develop and collaborate. Collaboration will help us travel far. And if you go far, we go far. If you win, we win. And collaboration provides an opportunity for all of us to go far together. Next slide. So through collaboration, as I mentioned, all of these things come together. Involvement, better relationships, better commitment, and better communication. Evaluation. After the group has begun collaborating and working together for a while, the members need to revisit their plan and see if it's resulting in what they had hoped for. And that may be necessary for the group to collect more information. Again, you saw these examples in your logic model. So you might have to compare new information with the information that you already have, and you might need to tweak things, or you might need to change the way this discussion takes place. There are two types of evaluation to discuss in the decision-making process. Next slide. Formative and summative evaluations. Formative evaluation is when information is reviewed, and that's usually done in-house or with a small test group, as Tatiana had mentioned, through focus groups or small groups of people. A summative evaluation is done at the end of the plan to look at what has been accomplished. This is known as measuring your final results. And there the team evaluates the efforts that have been made, and you kind of decide if you're on the right path or not, or if you need to change the direction. You may consider what may need to be done differently, or talk about even what's been discovered. So another way of looking at this, as quoted by Robert Stakes, is when the cook tastes the soup, that's formative. When the guest tastes the soup, that's summative. I'm going to pass this back on to Tatiana.
Sometimes one of the most difficult tasks for groups is reaching agreement on an issue. And there are two main processes groups can use for reaching agreement. They are voting and consensus decision making. Voting is one way and the most formal way to reach agreement. Robert's Rules of Order is a tool that provides structure to the voting process. There are formal rules for to make, pass, discuss, and vote on motions. And the majority of members must vote in favor for the motion to pass. Meeting minutes typically document the decision-making process and the votes of group members. Another way groups create agreement is through consensus. Consensus is reached when the whole group comes to a mutual agreement. It is true compromise and can be complicated, lengthy, emotional, yet rewarding process. It has the potential to strengthen group relationships. It is important to remember that consensus doesn't necessarily mean that everyone gets the outcome they want, but instead the outcome is acceptable to everyone. It involves combining proposals to achieve a better overall position that has more support. And to come to a consensus, make sure that every member is heard of and feels listened to. And try to avoid sort of a majority vote and allow time to build an agreement. Sometimes what happens with people in groups that they are afraid or unsure they should speak up when their opinion differs from the mainstream. But don't change your mind simply to avoid conflict. Reach an agreement or keep the peace. Think outside the box and try to come to a next best choice for everyone. Next slide, please, Debbie. Even if the group has not found a process, you can. All good processes are really just a plan for staying organized, taking action, and planning for the next steps. Here are tips that may help you personally be effective. Organize your information so that you can see what is missing. Keep in mind the group's goals, those SMART goals that we were talking about just earlier. List your priorities so you stay focused on them. Keep track of where others stand on decisions and those who disagree so that you can know which members need additional information or clarification. Ask the leader or a facilitator to explain member roles to you so you know how you can be most helpful. Take notes. Even if the group may have a formal or official minute taker or note taker, take your own notes so you know what the next steps are and you will be able to take action. And write down the results of your activities so you can see where progress has been made. Now we go to Michelle and we'll do a few poll questions.
Thanks so much, Tatiana. So let's just review some of the things that we've just learned and spoken about. The first poll I'd like to do is what process, now that you've heard the definition of different processes that groups use, what process does your group use, does your team or organization use Robert's Rule of Order or consensus decision making? Okay, almost half of you have voted. Let's give another couple seconds. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. And about 93% of you have shared that you use consensus decision making over Robert's Rule of Order. And thanks so much for sharing that. And now let's get into some of the different questions on the different types of decision making. Which statement guides the consensus decision making process? That team members opposed to the decision can suggest modifications. All team members contribute and share in the final decision. Differences are viewed as helpful rather than hindering, or all of the above. And about 30% of you have voted. Just give it another 5 seconds or so if I can just get your response to the question. Appreciate it. All right, a couple more seconds. I'm going to close the poll. Okay, so with 70% of you voting, 84% of you say all of the above. And all of the above is the correct answer. All of those statements do guide the decision-making process. So thanks so much for participating in the poll. And I would like to turn it over now to, I'm sorry, are there any questions that anyone has? You can put that in the chat box at any time, but we can open up the webinar at this time for any questions that anyone has. Karen, do you have any questions that anyone has typed in?
At this time, I don't see any questions, and I don't see any hands raised, so you can go ahead and move on.
Okay, so just remember, anytime you can type that in, and we can address it at our next break for questions. So, Diane, if you can continue.
In this section, we will learn about the tools groups use. We really get into nuts and bolts of how groups operate. Here on your screen, you see a list of common tools that groups use, and in the following slides, we will discuss these tools in further detail. Needing facilitator or leader, sometimes called chairperson, keeps discussion going and makes sure everyone is able to share in the group. To facilitate a meeting, good facilitators use some common strategies. Among them, facilitators make everyone feel comfortable and valued, and they allow time for small talk and use open body language like uncrossed arms. Facilitators encourage participation by all members by using open-ended questions, dividing groups into small groups, and using flip charts and handouts. Facilitators also prevent and manage conflict by using team-building activities, setting ground rules, and drawing attention to things that everyone agrees on instead of focusing on disagreements. They ensure quality decisions are being made. Finally, they make sure the meetings stay on track and the group is getting done what needs to be done. Okay, ground rules. Ground rules, sometimes called working norms or group guidelines or participation agreement, many different terms. They create atmosphere where thoughts and perspectives can be openly shared. It is very helpful if a group agrees on the rules and reviews them and possibly posting them as a handout at the beginning of each meeting. Sometimes throughout the meetings, members may need reminders about the ground rules too. Some common examples of ground rules that we used in the past are speak openly and honestly, ask questions. This one is one of my favorites. Sometimes families or the ones new to the group need that permission to interrupt and ask a question in a good way of saying that. Be additive, not repetitive. Listen carefully and respectfully to each other. No sidebar conversations. Keep comments brief and stay focused on the task is another good one. Turn off your cell phones. Start and end on time. Explore differences respectively and look for common ground. And finally, some groups may have the following rule as all shared information is confidential. As you know, sometimes meetings are very formal and follow rules and procedures. Other meetings are very informal and may feel more like a conversation. It is important for groups to agree on how meetings will run on the outset. We are going back to Diane.
Yeah, thank you. So a really useful tool for running all meetings is to have an agenda. So you can think of the agenda as your roadmap for the meeting. And the agendas can be very, very formal or informal, but they should always include the main items to be discussed at the meeting. So who's going to develop the agenda? That's usually the big question. So whoever is the group leader, might be a steering committee, they usually are responsible for developing the agenda, but it's a great idea to ask all your members for any items they would like to include on the agenda. This helps get buy-in to your meetings, it helps people attend and participate more. So the agenda really has three parts you can think of it: the opening, discussion and decisions, and the close and the conclusion or closing. So the agenda, I wanted to say the other thing is an agenda is most useful if it's prepared in advance and sent to all the people you plan on attending your meeting well in advance of the meeting. So the facilitator usually follows the agenda and has a number of roles at the meeting. And I will say that often we think of that as one person, but that can be a shared leadership role. So you might rotate it for different meetings or even have two people doing it. So you don't have to think of it as just the leader is always facilitating all meetings. But the facilitator will be the one who really sets the tone and the pace of the meeting, who reviews previous minutes. The facilitator helps keeps discussion and decisions on track and also keeps an eye on whether ground rules are being followed. And then the facilitator also will help identify next steps, future agenda items, and whatever other items are on your agenda to cover. Next. So a really good thing at meetings is to have minutes. So minutes really are a summary of the main things that happened. It's a record that you can go back to over time to know what you decided on and what actions need to be taken. The other great thing with minutes is they're wonderful to send to members who could not be at your meetings. So it'll help keep people up to date. If you are a government-funded group, it's actually required that your minutes become public. So you can look for minutes like from Board of Education and other groups, usually on their websites. So a good idea is to remember to take your own notes as well, because they may reflect some more details or things that the official minutes do not. Next slide. So the biggest challenge for meetings is time management. There's no doubt this is huge. And often what happens is, and we've probably all had this experience, it just runs way over time and you're there way longer than you had planned to be. So if that's the case, you need to think about, is the agenda too full? Maybe you need to have less items on it. Are you really following the ground rules, or do you need some additional rules? Another great thing is to have a timekeeper. So I have someone right now telling me how much time I have left for my portion of this today. So that can be a rotating role. One of your members each meeting keeps time. And then the other thing is you may want to consider from time to time having a longer meeting where discussion can go deeper without the time constraints to dive deep into complex issues that you're trying to tackle. But time management is crucial to deal. So turning it back to Tatiana to wrap up the last section of this.
Written guidance. Written guidance helps group members know how to interact with the group. One of the very first things you should do when you begin to serve on a group that has one of these, one of the following items, bylaws, policies, procedures, and compacts, is to ask for a copy of them and read them carefully. All of the business your group does must conform to the written guidance. Your group may not have all four or have some parts of it. However, it is important to have it spelled out so your group makes decisions that are consistent with the overall group purpose. Bylaws, which are designed to help a group function in an orderly manner and can be considered the group's operating manual. For example, they might explain the types of members who can serve on the group, how long members can serve, and many more. Perfect example would be school district Board of Education bylaws. Policies differ from rules or laws. We previously discussed Robert's Rules of Order for meetings. It's an example of a policy for making decisions. Policies describe how a group will take action on a decision and explain the what and the why. So going back to original example of Board of Education, they may have policies concerning community relations or administration, pupils, as well as instructional personnel. Procedures and protocols. There are detailed step-by-step instructions on how to complete a certain task. While policies describe the rules of an organization, a procedure describes in detail how its policy is translated into action. Procedures could specify protocols, for example, for submitting expenses for child care or transportation or staff development. They explain the what, the how, the where, and the when. Finally, compacts. They're least formal and more like an agreement. Groups can find it helpful to write a compact. By writing the information down and having everyone sign the agreement makes it clear how group members will share the responsibility. A perfect example of a compact that we had shared previously is Essex County County Council for Young Children commitment card for those members who would like to serve on a steering committee. Moving on to the open and closed sessions. Some groups are required by law to conduct their meetings openly. For example, City Council or Board of Education meetings. There are times, though, when the group might need to discuss issues privately. Open meetings are open to anyone who wants to attend, and the public is invited to listen, not only listen to the group's discussion, but also participate by providing feedback and input during a scheduled public participation time, also known as public comment section. Open meetings build trust and credibility in your work as a group. However, closed sessions might be necessary when it is not appropriate for the public or non-members to listen to a discussion on an agenda item. There are certain topics that groups need to deal with in closed sessions or executive sessions. There are personnel issues and confidential information. And just as a reminder or a tip, meeting minutes should not detail closed session topics. Instead, they may simply state that a group went into closed session, say, at 12:51 p.m. to discuss confidential information. Finally, there are many reasons why meetings are unproductive. Some common reasons are participants or group members unprepared for meeting. They haven't read their agenda of meeting minutes from the previous meeting or their agenda for the current meeting. Agenda may not have been given in advance for them to prepare. The group doesn't follow their agenda. Not everyone feels like their voices are being heard. One of the ways to go about this is to use a round-robin technique, so all members can provide their input. Data is lacking or not used in making decisions. That definitely makes the meetings unproductive. No action items are given, and if there are action items, no timelines or deadlines or follow-ups are set. At this time, we would like if you type in the question pane any of the strategies that you personally have used to make your meetings more productive. So take a minute or two, and in the questions section of your pane, type in some of the strategies you must have used to make your meetings more productive. And while
you're typing, we have a couple of questions. One of the questions is, since CPACs are required by the Board of Education, groups that receive any type of government funding, oops, sorry, questions are coming in and I can't see that part of the screen. Okay. They're wondering if it applies to CPAGs to share a report to the public. Would you like to answer that, Diane?
Sure. I mean, certainly, so we know that there's no mandate for what CPAGs have to do. The code is one sentence, but best practice would suggest that absolutely sharing meeting minutes and agendas for special education parent advisory groups, not everybody may know that acronym, is a great idea and a best practice, definitely.
Okay, we have some strategies that are coming in. Jennifer says that each person provides a different resource and opinion. Okay, and she also says we create an agenda, we review from the previous meeting and discuss the next steps. So that's important to do that as well, to talk about what's going to happen next. Here's another good strategy. Minutes are sent to all who have ever attended at least one time, so you keep them in the loop with what's going on.
That's a good idea.
Sorry?
That's a good idea.
Yeah, yeah.
sending those things will help boost your interest and participation in your efforts as well.
Correct. And Nicole says she sends the agendas in advance. They keep time, and they allot time for questions at the end.
Great.
Okay. And so Elizabeth says that she uses round robins agendas, focusing on what really matters by being welcoming, cordial, and comfortable. And that's really important to make people feel like they're welcome and their opinion matters.
Right, right. And for 1 second, Karen, the round robin, we've been training the county councils on this strategy, but it's that each person gets a chance to share one idea at a time, and you go around, rather than letting the first person share 5 ideas, and maybe they took all of yours. So it's a great way to ensure everybody's voice is heard.
Excuse me. And someone else added use of a parking lot. Would you like to explain that briefly?
Oh, sure. So many times in meetings, ideas come up which, or issues or anything come up which are very, very important, but maybe off the topic at hand. So rather than dismissing them, it's a great idea to put a piece of flip chart paper up, write on it parking lot, and record any of those things which should be addressed at another time in your parking lot. So you might go loop back to them at the end of your meeting, or you could add them to the agenda of a future meeting if appropriate. But you don't want to lose those things. All right, if you could advance the slide. So I do want to remind everybody that in your control panel on the right-hand side, there is a section of handouts. And you will get a list of the resources for both Section 3 and next slide, Section 4. And there's a lot of great things here, so if you have further questions on any of those, it's wonderful to do that. I think we just did the questions, so please download in the handouts the PowerPoint from today, the guide section for Section 3 and Section 4 of the guidebook, and then the resources. Also, we have a template for SMART goals. Additionally, we will put a lot of additional resources up on our website, so like a template for action plans and a couple other things. I also want to remind you that you can visit the website in Wisconsin that produced this curriculum, servingongroups.org. We also invite you to come back frequently to the START Project upcoming events page to register for the remaining webinars in this series and to look at other events we're holding. And we particularly encourage people to check out and join, if you're not already a part of your County Council for Young Children, which exists in every county, and come to our webpage with some resources around that, or connect with us to find your County Council for Young Children locally. And lastly, please, we welcome you to the SPAN website, which has tons and tons of good resources, and if you need any assistance on individual issues, you can always call our warm line at 1-800-654-7726. Following this webinar today, you will receive a link for a survey to let us know how we're doing. We really value your input and hope that you will take a moment to complete that. And we also remind you that in September, the next webinar up in this series is how to use data on a decision-making group, a really interesting one with some good tools and that we'll dive into, so please register directly for that. And later in September, the overview in Spanish. So I believe, unless my team, please help me out if I've forgotten anything else.
No,
Please.
I think you covered it.
Great. So please complete your survey. Thank you very, very much for joining us, and have a great end to the summer. And please be in touch if we can be of any assistance. Have a great day, and that will conclude the webinar.